Planned on stopping at the hardware store that Saturday morning. My knee had been acting up all week-old injury from years of roofing work, and my daughter had already told me twice to stay off ladders and take it easy. But the faucet in my guest bathroom had been dripping for 3 weeks straight, and I'm the kind of man who can't sit still when something in the house needs fixing, so I drove out to Hanson's Hardware on Route 9, the one I've been going to since my kids were small enough to sit in the cart. I was standing in the plumbing aisle holding 2 different replacement cartridges up to the light, trying to read the part numbers when I heard her voice. I almost didn't recognize it at first. It was quiet, too quiet. The way she used to talk when she was a little girl and had done something wrong and was hoping I wouldn't notice. I turned around, and there she was, 3 aisles over by the paint section, standing next to a display of brushes she clearly wasn't interested in. Her phone pressed to her ear, her free hand wrapped around her own elbow like she was holding herself together. My daughter, 33 years old, and she looked small. I set both cartridges down and walked toward her. She had her back to me, so she didn't see me coming. I was close enough to hear her side of the conversation before she knew I was there. "I know," she was saying. "I know, I already told you. I'll take care of it. Please don't." "Okay. Okay." She hung up. Stood there for a second with her hand still on the phone. "Hey, sweetheart." She spun around so fast she nearly knocked the brush display over. Her eyes went wide, and for just a split second, before she could rearrange her face, I saw something there that I hadn't seen since she was in high school. Fear. Not surprise. Fear. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "Faucet's dripping," I said. "What's going on?" "Nothing." She smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "I just needed some paint chips. I'm thinking about redoing the living room." She wasn't holding a single paint chip. I looked at her for a long moment. I've known my daughter her entire life. I taught her to ride a bike in the parking lot of our old church. I drove her to every cross-country meet from 7th grade through senior year. I held her hand in the hospital waiting room the night her son was born. I know when she's lying to me, and she knows I know, and usually that's enough to get the truth out in 30 seconds. But that morning, she held the smile, and that told me more than anything else could have. "You eaten breakfast?" I asked. "I'm fine, Dad. That's not what I asked." She exhaled. "Just barely." "No. There's a diner on the corner. Come have coffee with me." She looked at her phone, looked at me, and I watched her do some kind of calculation in her head that I didn't like at all. "Okay," she finally said. "Yeah, okay." We sat in a corner booth. She ordered a black coffee and didn't touch it. I ordered the same and drank half of mine while we made small talk about nothing. Her son's soccer league, whether my knee would need surgery, the weird late frost we'd had that year. I let her talk. I let her take her time. It was when the waitress came back to refill our cups that my daughter looked down at the table and said very quietly, "He took my name off the bank account." I set my cup down. "Which account?" "The joint one. The one my direct deposit goes into." She still wasn't looking at me. She had her hands wrapped around her mug, and she was staring at the coffee like she was reading something in it. "When?" I said. "About 6 weeks ago." 6 weeks. She'd been sitting on this for 6 weeks. "Does he know your direct deposit still goes there?" "He redirected it." She said it so flatly, it took me a second to understand what she meant. "He called my HR department and said I had authorized a change. He had some of my information. Social Security, my employee ID. They processed it." I kept my voice steady. "Where's your paycheck going now?" "An account I don't have access to." The diner was half full and somebody's kid was laughing 2 tables over, and the jukebox in the corner was playing something I couldn't name. And I sat there and I thought about my daughter driving to work every morning for 6 weeks with no access to her own paycheck. "The house is in his name," she said. "We never changed it after we got married because he said it was complicated with his mother's investment in the property, and we deal with it later, and I trusted him." She swallowed. "I was stupid." "You weren't stupid," I said. "You trusted your husband." That's not stupid. That's what you're supposed to do. She finally looked up. Her eyes were dry, which almost made it worse. He said if I try to leave, he'll tell his mother, and she'll have his uncle file something. The uncle's an attorney. They'll go after my job, say I falsified something at work. I don't even know what, some complaint they apparently already drafted. And I'll lose my position, and then I won't have anything, and I can't take care of Caleb, and she stopped, pressed her lips together. He's been saying it for 3 months, every time I bring up leaving. That's what he says. 3 months. My daughter had been living with this for 3 months. I thought about the last time I'd seen them together, Easter Sunday. He'd been fine, helpful even, carried things in from the car, played with Caleb in the backyard. I'd thought he seemed like a decent enough husband. Quiet, but decent. I'd thought my daughter was happy. I hadn't looked closely enough. Is Caleb okay? I said. He's fine. He doesn't know anything. He thinks Mom and Dad are just stressed. She wrapped both hands tighter around the mug. I've been trying to keep it away from him. Where is he right now? With my mother-in-law. She takes him Saturday mornings, which meant she was alone, which meant she'd had some space to breathe, and she'd driven to a hardware store. Not to buy anything, I realized now, but to get out of the house. And I'd happened to be there. I don't believe in coincidences. I want to be honest about what I felt sitting in that booth, because I think it matters. There was anger, yes. The kind of anger that doesn't make noise. It just settles into your chest and sits there, heavy and very still. But underneath the anger was something else, something that felt a lot like grief, because the woman sitting across from me had been carrying something enormous for months, and she hadn't called me. And I understood why she hadn't called me. She was trying to protect me, and she was scared, and she'd convinced herself she could handle it alone. But understanding it didn't make it hurt less. My daughter had been drowning, and I hadn't even known enough to throw a rope. I paid the check. We sat in my truck in the parking lot for another hour, and she told me everything, all of it, starting from around the time Caleb was 2 and she'd first noticed something was off. The way her husband monitored her phone, the way his mother would show up unannounced and walk through the house like she owned it, commenting on what my daughter had or hadn't done, what she'd cooked, how she'd organized things, the gradual tightening of it, so slow she said she barely noticed, until one day she realized she hadn't made a single decision about her own life in almost 2 years. I kept thinking I was overreacting, she said. He never hit me. He didn't scream at me or anything like that. He was just always so certain that his way was right and I was always wrong, and eventually She shook her head. I stopped arguing. It was easier. That's the part that broke my heart. Not the bank account, not the threats. The fact that my daughter, who as a kid had opinions about everything, who used to argue with me about the right way to load a dishwasher, who once wrote a 4-page letter to her 6th grade teacher disputing a grade, had stopped arguing. That's not love. That's erosion. I drove her back to her car. Before she got out, I told her not to say a word to her husband about our conversation. She looked nervous about that, and I understood why. She'd gotten into the habit of being nervous about things she had every right to do. I told her to go home, be normal, go through the motions of the weekend. I told her I'd call her by Monday. Dad, she said, don't do anything that makes this worse. I'm going to make it better, I said. That's what I'm worried about. I said. That's what I'm worried about. I reached over and squeezed her hand. I'm not going to do anything stupid, I promise, but I need you to trust me. She looked at me for a long moment, then she nodded. I watched her pull out of the lot. Then I sat in my truck and I made a phone call. His name is Lou Ferretti, and we have known each other for 31 years. We met on the job site in 1994 when we were both young and broke and working 12-hour days in the summer heat, and we've been friends ever since. Lou went into law, family law specifically, and then after about 15 years of that he moved into employment and labor. He understood better than anyone how workplaces could be weaponized. He's the kind of attorney who doesn't impress people at cocktail parties because he doesn't talk about his cases, but the people who need him know how to find him. I explained the situation. Lou listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always appreciated about him. When I finished, there was a pause. The payroll redirection, he said. That's wire fraud. I thought it might be something like that. It's also potentially identity theft, depending on what documentation he submitted to HR. What's her employer? I told him. Okay, and this uncle, the attorney, do you know his name? I didn't, but I told Lou I'd find out. Here's what I want you to do, Lou said. Don't confront the husband. Don't threaten anyone. Let her go through the weekend normally. Monday morning, have her call me first thing and find out the uncle's name. What are you going to do with the uncle's name? Lou was quiet for a moment. There's a bar complaint process for attorneys who file frivolous complaints or make threats they don't intend to follow through on. I'd like to know who I'm dealing with. I got the uncle's name from my daughter that evening through a text that looked like nothing. I asked how Caleb's soccer season was going, and she answered, and buried in the middle of a long message about shin guards and practice schedules was a name, Leonard Kowalski. She'd worked in there casually, like it was nothing. She was smarter than she gave herself credit for. I passed the name to Lou. Sunday was the longest day I can remember in years. I did the things I normally do on Sundays. Fixed the faucet. Finally, mowed the back section of the yard. Made myself a sandwich for lunch. But my mind was somewhere else the whole time. I kept thinking about my grandson sitting in the back seat of a car, not knowing that his whole world was about to change. I kept thinking about my daughter making dinner in a kitchen that didn't feel like hers anymore, smiling at a man she was afraid of, pretending everything was fine. I've made my share of mistakes as a father. I worked too much when my kids were small. The nature of the business, I told myself. And some of that was true, but not all of it. There were games I missed and recitals I showed up to late, and conversations I should have had and didn't. By the time I slowed down enough to really pay attention, my kids were mostly grown. My daughter turning to me in a hardware store. My daughter letting me take her for coffee. That wasn't nothing. That was her reaching out in the only way she could manage. And I wasn't going to let her down. Monday morning, she called Lou at 9 o'clock. He spent almost 2 hours on the phone with her, and she called me afterward, and her voice sounded different. Lighter. He said the payroll thing alone is enough to file a criminal complaint, she told me. He's writing a letter to HR at my company to flag the unauthorized change and protect my position. He said once they understand what happened, there's no action they can take against me. And the uncle? I said. She almost laughed. It was a short sound, surprised at itself. Lou knows him. They overlapped at the same firm about 20 years ago, apparently. Lou said to tell Leonard that he said hello. I leaned back in my chair. What does that mean? She asked. It means Leonard Kowalski isn't going to file anything, I said. It means people who make threats count on the other person not having anyone in their corner. She was quiet for a moment. Dad, she said, why didn't you just tell me you knew Lou? Would you have called me sooner if I had? She didn't answer, which was an answer. Within 10 days, the situation had shifted more completely than I would have dared to hope. Lou's letter to my daughter's employer arrived on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, her HR department had flagged the payroll change as unauthorized and reversed it. Her direct deposit was restored. The company's legal team reached out to Lou directly. The word litigation had been mentioned, and suddenly people were very interested in getting things right. The uncle never filed anything. Lou had made one phone call of his own, a professional courtesy call. He described it, where he outlined what he knew and what he intended to do if any frivolous complaint was pursued. I don't know exactly what was said in that conversation. I didn't ask. What I know is that Leonard Kowalski went very quiet very quickly. My daughter filed for divorce 3 weeks after that Saturday morning in the hardware store. Her husband, faced with potential criminal exposure for the payroll fraud and no longer backed by his uncle's legal threat, did not contest it. The house became a point of negotiation. His mother's investment complicated things, as it always had. But Lou is thorough, and my daughter walked away with enough to make a real start. She's renting a place now, about 12 minutes from my house. It's a 2-bedroom on a quiet street with a big backyard, and Caleb has claimed the bedroom with the window that looks out at the oak tree. He told me last weekend that he can see squirrels from his bed. He seemed very happy about this. I think about that moment in the diner sometimes, the way she wrapped her hands around the mug, the way she said I was stupid and meant it, and how wrong she was. My daughter is not stupid. She is one of the most capable people I know. She just spent 4 years in a situation that was specifically designed to make her believe otherwise, surrounded by people who had a vested interest in keeping her small and uncertain and afraid. That's not stupidity. That's what sustained pressure does to a person, even a strong one. I'm not going to pretend I fixed everything. Lou fixed a lot of it. His expertise, his professional relationships, his willingness to pick up the phone on a Saturday because I asked him to. My daughter fixed most of the rest of it herself, once she had solid ground under her feet. All I did was show up at the right hardware store on the right morning and notice that something was wrong. But I'll tell you this, if I'd been the kind of father who didn't pay attention, who took "I'm fine" at face value, who let her walk out of that paint aisle and drive back to a house she was afraid of, we wouldn't be where we are now. Sometimes just showing up is everything. Caleb asked me last Sunday if I wanted to see the squirrel that lives in his oak tree. We stood at his bedroom window for 20 minutes waiting, and eventually the squirrel appeared, and my grandson grabbed my hand and said, "There he is, Pop. There he is," like it was the most important thing in the world. I told him it was pretty great. It is. I keep coming back to that moment in the diner when my daughter said I was stupid and meant it with her whole chest. That's the thing that stays with me most. Not what her husband did. Not the payroll fraud or the threats or the years of quiet erosion. The fact that a woman I raised, a woman who once wrote a 4-page letter to dispute a 6th grade grade, had been worn down so completely that she believed the problem was her own judgment. That's not stupidity. That's what happens when someone spends years in an environment designed to make them doubt themselves. Every small control, every redirected decision, every moment of being told they're wrong. None of it feels catastrophic in isolation, but it compounds. And one day you wake up and you've stopped arguing, stopped deciding, stopped trusting your own read on a situation. My daughter didn't lose her intelligence. She lost her footing. And there's a profound difference between those two things. What I've come to understand, sitting with this story for a few months now, is that what saved her wasn't one phone call. It was a chain of choices that started long before that Saturday morning. Lou spent 30 years building expertise and professional relationships because he believed in doing his work with integrity, not cutting corners, not making threats he couldn't back up, just knowing the law and knowing people and being someone you could call. My daughter, even frightened and exhausted, had the clarity to slip a name into a text message about soccer shin guards. That's not luck. That's intelligence that didn't disappear just because someone tried to bury it. And she had to find the courage to get in my truck. That's the part nobody sees. It's easy to root for someone once they're already moving. But to take that first step when you're scared, when you've been told for years that your instincts are wrong, when the person threatening you has an attorney in the family, that takes something real. That takes a kind of quiet toughness that doesn't look dramatic from the outside, but is everything on the inside. I think about cause and effect a lot more than I used to. The way her husband's choices created consequences he didn't anticipate, that the same financial control he used to trap her became the exact evidence that exposed him. The uncle who was supposed to be the threat turned out to be the vulnerability because Lou knew him, because reputations follow people. You don't get to build a life on manipulation and then act surprised when the whole structure comes down. And I think about what I want Caleb to understand someday, when he's old enough. Not the specifics of what happened, he doesn't need to carry that, but the underlying truth of it, that how you treat people matters, that integrity isn't just a word for speeches, that the people around you notice more than you think. His mother figured that out. She stood back up, and watching him press his face against that bedroom window, waiting for a squirrel, knowing he gets to grow up in a home where he feels safe. I think that's about as clear a picture of cause and effect as I've ever seen.